Subtlety wasn't cutting it. Whispers, hints, and half-truths weren't going to get through to the Hawthorne family any longer. She needed a more direct, more forthright strategy, something that would label Adrian as irresponsible or reckless, and in a rush she spent the morning rummaging through household calendars and domestic accounts, looking for some minor misfortune she could exaggerate. When nothing promising came up, she knew she'd need to create the incident, Clara, muttering, with cold smile, if I can't warp reality, I'll invent it. And then they'll have no option but to suspect him. By the afternoon, Clara had subtly steered the family staff into working with her, or at least into unconscious witnesses of her faked evidence. She laid a series of little financial discrepancies and lost items in Adrian's usual haunts, waiting for someone to stumble across them and tell the family, Clara, to herself, smugly, now that they see this, Adrian will finally lose his grip. But as she watched standing in the corner, she could notice underlying telltales of distrust, the manner in which Mrs. Hawthorne's eye stayed guarded over her shoulder, the side glance Lily gave Adrian when she walked past him in the hallway, the hesitation in Trevor's pace. Over dinner, Clara made her bravest move. Clara, loudly, with forced distress, I couldn't help but notice, Mr. Adrian, that some of the accounts on the house have been irregular of late. Perhaps it's just a slip-up. The family reaction was composed. Mrs. Hawthorne gave a level glare, not rising to the bait. Mrs. Hawthorne, flatly, Adrian? Is this true? Adrian, forearmed by Clara's planted proof, answered in a quiet but firm tone, Adrian, I have double-checked everything, Mother. There is no variation in the accounts. If there is a muddle, it will be due to misplaced documents, not my carelessness. The table breathed its collective breath of relief. Clara's masterfully constructed trap seemed to be disintegrating before their very eyes. Even Trevor, who had previously gone along with Clara's trickery, was not willing this time, fidgeting anxiously with a napkin. Trevor, whispering to Clara, are you sure this is the right way? Clara's lips twisted into a thin smile. She was realizing that every move she made towards controlling the family was being met with suspicion, mistrust, or flat-out rebellion. Clara, to herself, annoyed, they're slipping away from me, they all seem to be backing him now. I need to pick up the pace. Adrian, sensing the turn of heart in the family, remained calm. Adrian, to himself, every desperate move she makes is a crack. Every hesitation they show is proof that she's losing control. Let her escalate, we'll be ready when she overplays her hand. The Hawthorne household began to quietly close ranks around Adrian. Clara's aggressiveness was only highlighting her manipulations, making her appear unstable rather than convincing. Scene 1, Damien's obsession. Damien paced the small study, the recall of his public humiliation at the academy burning in his mind. His pride, wounded by Adrian's collected demeanor and clever maneuverings, had turned to madness. Damien, fist clenched, growling to himself, I can't. I won't let him get away with it. Not him, never. He's going to pay, even if it costs me everything. He picked up a notebook from the table and began outlining a plan, small, intricate, and Damien started to watch Adrian's routine surreptitiously, where he was going, who he trusted, and where there were slight vulnerabilities in the home. He knew that Clara's manipulations had discredited the family's view of him in the past, but Adrian's growing dominance now meant that Damien needed to strike more openly. Damien, thinking, she's losing control, but if I hit, I can wrap this up. I can take him out before he's unassailable. He inquired discreetly with his old acquaintances, trying to discover dirt or secrets, something to be manipulated and used to vilify Adrian. Damien chose his first strike with care. He would stage a minor accident to look deliberate. A negligent stumble, a stolen letter, a misplaced note, something Adrian would not expect. He rehearsed each step in his mind, imagining Adrian's shock, the Hawthorne's disappointment, and the victory finally being within his grasp. Damien, whispering, smirking, one mistake, one slip, and it's over. Even while Damien plotted, there was the subtle fear of detection building up against him. Every move he attempted to make too quickly, Adrian was a step ahead. The sneaky, subtle plotting that Damien had been employing was no match for a man as smart and calm as Adrian. Damien, frustrated, grumbling to his always 3 steps ahead. How does he do it? The darkness in Damien's mind grew, and he realized that he would have to be ruthless, and even cross lines he had never imagined crossing. Damien had designed the blueprints for his first assault by sunset, a public shame trap meant to weaken Adrian's allies, render him unstable, and even turn the family against him. He gazed at his face in the mirror, the expression on his face changing into something sinister. Damien, whispering to himself, Adrian Hawthorne, it ends shortly. I shall be the one standing. Damien had spent days preparing a letter of deception, designed to make Adrian look irresponsible with the family money, was tucked into an envelope embossed with the Hawthorne family crest. He waited until late in the evening, when the house was quiet and the members of the family were dispersed. Stealthily, he left the envelope on the family desk, to be discovered in the morning. Damien, to himself, in a whisper, the die has been cast. Let the games begin. A small mistake, nothing they'll ever recall. He won't know what struck him. Adrian entered the study the next morning, his perceptive eyes immediately noticing the envelope. Something in the placement was off. Adrian, frowning to himself, this isn't Clara's style. Too obvious, too rushed. He opened the letter carefully, reading its contents. It was believable, sure, but the forgery was unprofessional in a few subtle ways only someone with his attention to detail would notice. Adrian, smiling slightly, Damien. Trying too hard, as always. Instead of confronting Damien directly, Adrian decided to test the trap. He allowed the letter to fall into Clara's stream of information, pretending not to know its suspicious contents. Adrian, to himself, let him think he's succeeded, and then we see what kind of desperate measures he'll take next. He called Elias later that morning, relating the events in veiled, coded language. Adrian, Elias, pay attention today. Someone's trying to cause trouble. Let's see how they react to a little pressure. Elias, smiling, you mean, we do nothing and let Damien hang himself? Adrian, smiling, that's it. Quietly. At midday, Damien began to hear whispers from staff members who had already begun to notice minor inconsistencies in the letter. Panic gnawed at him. Damien, slamming his fist onto a table, no, this can't be happening. I planned everything. How could he? The more he tried to cover his tracks, the guiltier he seemed. Damien's control was slipping, and the first seeds of doubt began to sprout within his allies, including Clara, who still wished to use him as a pawn. Adrian, meanwhile, continued to observe from the shadows, discovering Damien's strategy and friends. Every one of Damien's mistakes was a hint, a way to stay one step ahead of his next move. Adrian, to himself, one by one, the pieces will fall. He's impatient. He's reckless. That's exactly what I need. By the end of the day, Damien's carefully laid trap had spectacularly backfired, though no one else yet knew it. Adrian's counterplot remained hidden, giving him the upper hand in the silent war brewing in the Hawthorne household. Scene 1, Damien's daring plan. Damien could not stomach the steady unraveling of his schemes. Humiliation had burned him once, and now the pinpricks of his failures chafed. He decided on an outrageous, public strike, a strategic strike that would humiliate Adrian before the entire household and academy staff. He grinned as he sketched out his plan: sabotage a school presentation Adrian was giving to the family's charitable foundation, plant a mistake in Adrian's notes that would make him incompetent and negligent, ensure that the staff and family witnessed it firsthand. Damien, to himself, let's see everyone laugh at you this time, Adrian. One wrong move, and it all falls apart. The presentation day, Adrian entered the main hall poised, Elias by his side. Damien had been overly interested, feigning curiosity while inwardly gloating. Damien, whispering to one of the staff members, smiling, just wait, it's going to be memorable. Adrian, however, noticed faint signs of tampering with his notes, enough to fuel his suspicions. Adrian, whispering to Elias, something's wrong. Damien's behind it, I'm sure. Keep your eyes peeled. Elias, smiling, let him try. I think today's going to be interesting. Adrian began to present, his voice strong and confident. At first, everything went smoothly. Then Damien's planted errors began to surface, tiny factual errors in charts and calculations. Damien's eyes gleamed as he sat back to watch the chaos. Damien, thinking, just a few missteps, they'll notice. They'll judge. Adrian's reputation will be ruined. Adrian, however, handled the errors with subtle finesse, correcting them before anyone else could catch them. His composure was flawless, turning Damien's trap into a display of Adrian's competence. Adrian, unruffled as you can see, these figures illustrate, and thank you for highlighting the minor discrepancy, it enables us to clarify this point even further. Murmurs of approval ran through the family and staff. Damien's smug smile faltered. By the end of the presentation, Damien's plan had backfired. Not only had Adrian avoided embarrassment, but he had impressed the family with his poise and sharp thinking. Damien, to himself, under his breath, clenching his teeth, no, how, this isn't possible. Everything was perfect, perfectly sabotaged. The small crowd surrounding them began to take notice of Damien's tense stance. Whispers began to circulate. The staff member to another, something's wrong with Damien, he's more annoyed than normal today. Adrian found Elias in an empty corridor after the presentation. Adrian, smiling slightly, another mistake for Damien. He's getting desperate. Elias, smiling, and the more desperate he gets, the easier he is to predict. Adrian knew this was just the beginning. Damien's public aggression had failed spectacularly, but it also confirmed one thing: Damien would escalate further. Adrian would need to remain vigilant, preparing for the inevitable confrontation that was fast approaching. Damien paced back and forth in his study, his eyes flashing with rage. Adrian's recent success had humiliated him, but he was not going to let it pass. His plan was simple and deadly. If he could not hurt Adrian himself, he would hit his loved ones. Damien, to himself, if I can spook his followers, drive him out. Then maybe, just maybe, he'll fall. They're his power. Remove that, and he's on shaky ground. He had two main goals: Elias, Adrian's loyal friend, and Miss Langford, the teacher who had begun quietly supporting Adrian's investigations into Clara's manipulation. Damien cornered Elias after class in the academy library, feigning concern. Damien, smiling falsely. Elias, I've been thinking, your loyalty to Adrian could be misplaced. Don't you see the trouble he's making? Elias, remaining calm, not intimidated. I see exactly what you're trying, Damien. Trying to intimidate me. It won't work. Damien's grin became smaller, becoming frustrated. He needed to take on a stronger attitude. Damien, leaning forward, speaking in a low voice, you're blind if you don't see how dangerous he is. Sometimes defending him takes a toll on you more than you can handle. Elias's face went hard, but he wouldn't let Damien realize he was afraid. Damien stormed out, enraged. His initial attempt to shut Adrian down had been unsuccessful, but he knew this was just the beginning. Then Damien asked Miss Langford to his private office to discuss school business. The moment the door was shut, his attitude became rigid. Damien, Miss Langford, I know that you've been assisting Adrian. Do you know what will happen if you are caught? Miss Langford, firm but calm, I've seen what's been happening, Damien. I'm not afraid to be on the side of the truth. Damien slammed his hand against the desk, voice rising. Damien, truth. Don't speak to me of truth. Your support could ruin everything you've worked for here. Stop helping him, or you'll regret it. Miss Langford, leaning forward, unwavering. Intimidation won't work. You've already exposed yourself. Your schemes are failing, Damien. Adrian has allies because he earns trust. Fear won't stop that. Damien's expression twisted with rage. He saw, for the first time, a glimmer of uncertainty creep in. He would have to go further, even resort to confronting in the open if his overt threats were insufficient. At a distance, Adrian had been watching Damien's growing desperation. He did not openly act yet. Instead, he worked behind the scenes with Elias and Miss Langford, subtly reinforcing their defenses and letting Damien overextend himself. Adrian, whispering to Elias, he's losing control. That's dangerous for him, and for us, if we're careless. Stay sharp. Elias, don't worry. We've got each other's backs. He won't catch us off guard. Adrian smiled faintly, knowing the next few moves would define whether Damien's aggression would backfire entirely. In the end, all that had been accomplished by Damien's attempts to bully Adrian's friends was to make visible to all who knew him his desperation. Teachers and students had whispers among them, Damien was unstable, irresponsible, and would take it to the limit. Adrian, meanwhile, grew braver. Damien's cruelty could now be expected. It opened the door for vengeance, traps, and sneaky victories. The battle lines were established, the stakes higher than ever. Scene 1. Damien's reckless plan. Damien, getting furious at repeated setbacks, decided to go big in a dramatic way. He arranged an ambush to trap Adrian, discredit him, and prove dominance once and for all. The plan was daring: create a showdown that would create the impression of Adrian having crossed moral boundaries, or worse, Damien, clenching his teeth, talking under his breath. This time, he won't slip away. One wrong move, and it's over. I'll destroy him, and no one will question it. He set the trap late at night, choosing a secluded location on the family estate, and left evidence that could be twisted against Adrian. Unbeknownst to Damien, Adrian had pieced together his growing desperation. With careful observation and intelligence from Elias, he realized Damien would attempt something reckless. Adrian, quietly, to Elias, his predictable in his rage. Let him make the move. We'll let his own arrogance take him down. Elias nodded, tense but ready, as they prepared to follow Damien's steps discreetly, ensuring no one would be harmed. Damien went to the designated location, intending to catch Adrian off guard. Instead, he found Adrian sitting calmly, flanked by stoic manner observers and a few loyal servants warned in advance. Damien, voice shaking a bit, attempting to sound menacing. Adrian, come into the clearing. Let's get this over with. Adrian, cool, with a twinkle of a smile. Desperation gets people careless, Damien. Sometimes. As Damien went along, Adrian subtly triggered the evidence Damien had set up, making it look like Damien himself had orchestrated an attack that got out of hand. During the chaos, Damien unknowingly fell into the same trap he had set for Adrian. By morning, word of the incident had spread. The staged attack was exposed as Damien's own creation, and witnesses confirmed his reckless actions. The family convened an emergency council. Family patriarch, sternly, voice echoing in the grand hall. Damien, your actions have crossed every line. You've endangered lives and brought disgrace upon this house. Damien tried to protest, but the evidence was clear. The councilmen and domestic staff were shocked as the arrogant young man, who had used to wield power through fear, now stood disgraced. Family matriarch, removed. You're no longer welcome here. You're excluded from this family, your position, your legacy, gone. Take a lesson from this, if you're able. Damien turned pale, the weight of his failure crashing over him. The empire he had tried to control slipped from his grasp. Adrian retreated into the house undramatically, watching the household regain equilibrium from tension. His followers, like Elias and Miss Langford, shared discreet grins. Adrian, whispering to Elias, often, individuals fall because they think the world bends to their will. Damien forgot one rule: pride always encounters reality. Elias, grinning, and now we can finally get our breath, at least for a brief moment. The Hawthorne estate, shaken but intact, began its slow recovery. Damien's humiliation was the demise of one of the most dangerous threats Adrian had ever faced, although Adrian knew life would continue challenging him in other ways. The morning following Damien's public humiliation, the Hawthorne household was dense with tension. The adults, parents, counselors, and even some of the relatives who were distant from the immediate family could no longer suppress the guilt that had been accumulating for weeks of suspicion against Adrian. Mrs. Hawthorne, whispering, in the library, to her husband, I cannot believe we allowed ourselves to be so blind. Adrian never deserved any of this. We nearly lost him to our own doubts. Mr. Hawthorne, nodding, voice low but resolute, true. We've depended too much on appearances, hearsay, and Clara's whispers. It's time we make amends, and it begins with honesty, owning up to our mistakes. Adrian, aware that their attitude was changing but still cautious, entered the main hall for breakfast. The old tension had relaxed somewhat, but he could sense that some barriers of mistrust still remained. Mrs. Hawthorne, approaching Adrian, tentative. Adrian, we owe you an apology. We doubted you when we had no cause to. We were misinformed, and that was wrong. Adrian, cautious, guarded. I appreciate that. But trust is not remade with words. It's shown in actions. Mr. Hawthorne, nodding resolutely. Then we'll show you. No more shadows of doubt from today. We're with you, if you'll let us. Adrian nodded fractionally, barely noticeably, understanding that trust would take time to be rebuilt, but the first cracks of reconciliation were appearing. In the days that followed, the Hawthornes tried in earnest, as seen through their actions. The family publicly acknowledged Adrian's achievements, clarifying misinformation that had been spread by Clara and Damien. Household staff were commanded to be deferential to Adrian. Not suspicious, small things, family dinners, individual conversations, and private acknowledgement began to wear away at the residual tension. Adrian, to Elias, in a quiet voice in the study, they are truthful. It is gradual, yet the Hawthornes are coming to terms with reality. That means something. Elias, with a smirk, and high time, too. They nearly lost you to their skepticism and Clara's poison. For all the Hawthornes' efforts at reconciliation, Adrian knew Clara's influence wasn't completely vanquished. Weakened but not eradicated, her insidious manipulation still lingered on the edges of the household, small whispers, doubting glances, and half-truths that could still fan the flames of suspicion. Adrian thought to himself, trust can be rebuilt, but caution remains. Clara may have been backed into a corner, but she won't go down without a fight. I must stay one step ahead. By night, the family enjoyed a novel moment of collective silence. Adrian was seated with them, no longer absolutely ostracized, as conversation came in cautious warmth. Laughter crept back in modest increments, and the oppressive mood that had gripped the estate for months started to clear. Mrs. Hawthorne, smiling slightly, almost diffidently, Adrian, can we perhaps begin again? Not as an experiment, but as a family. Adrian met her gaze, with a sincere desire to rebuild the past. Adrian, tenderly, with guarded hope, then let's try. The humbled and shattered Hawthorne family began the slow healing process. Adrian felt guarded hope for the first time in months, a possibility of genuine connection, respect, and trust. Clara paced in her private sitting room, the sharp heels of her shoes echoing against the polished floor. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling. Adrian, the one she had tried to destroy, was being embraced by the very family she had manipulated. Clara, muttering, teeth clenched, no, this can't happen. If Adrian wins them over completely, I'll be nothing. Forgotten. Invisible. Her eyes darted toward a small stack of papers on her desk, ledgers, forged letters, and gossip she had planted months ago. Clara, smiling cruelly, whispering to herself, then it's time to act, and act boldly. If subtlety won't work, I'll burn the bridge before anyone can cross it. Clara's first move was to tarnish the reputation of Adrian's supporters in the household. She began murmuring doubts to servants and distant relatives, questioning Adrian's intentions and loyalty. Housekeeper, speaking doubtfully to herself, I don't know. Can Adrian be that sly? Maybe there's more we don't know. Meanwhile, Clara arranged private meetings with some of Adrian's friends, suggesting he was manipulative, opportunistic, and only seeking to curry favor for personal gains. Clara, smiling sweetly, voice as smooth as silk, don't be deceived by him. He's intelligent, much too intelligent. Observe carefully, you may be amazed at what he can do. The venom was subtle but began to work. Adrian's friends began to observe little inconsistencies, tiny slips, things they couldn't yet quite prove. She knew that whispers would not do. She had to make a bold gesture to shake the whole household's confidence in Adrian. She staged a scene where his judgment was called into question publicly, in one of the family gatherings. Clara, shouting, feigning concern, pointing to a ledger, surely you all recall the last time Adrian made a decision about the finances of this estate. Do we want to make the same mistake again? Gasps echoed throughout the room. Faces shifted to Adrian, some questioning, some doubtful. Adrian, calm, measured, not rising to her bait. Clara, your figures are incomplete. The figures in entirety, if you'd like to review them, you'll discover the outcome is quite different from what you suggest. Clara, smiling thinly, leaning forward, whispering to a cousin, perhaps he believes he's being clever, yet cleverness doesn't win hearts if it hides the truth. The tension was mounting for Adrian, and though he seemed calm, internally he was scheming. Clara was getting reckless, pushing too much, revealing desperation. This was an opportunity. Adrian, to himself, silently, she cannot let me regain their trust, yet the more she strikes, the more she exposes herself. Every move she makes is a trap for herself. Meanwhile, Clara embarked on a more dangerous plan: forged documents, false accusations, and perhaps a staged incident that would embarrass Adrian publicly. She knew it was risky, but she couldn't let him cement his place in the family. Clara, gritting her teeth, writing furiously, "I will not be left behind. Not while I still have a breath in me, and not while I still have the power to ruin him." Before the day was out, the family felt the first tremors of Clara's vindictive return. Whispered warnings, sidelong glances, and insinuating recriminations flew thick and fast. Adrian, calm and unhurried, went to work building a response, not just to defend himself, but to subtly lay bare Clara's machinations without directly confronting her. "Not yet, Adrian," to Elias, in a whisper, "in the study she's getting desperate. Every move is becoming predictable now. We can use her own aggression against her, but we must be patient." Elias, smiling, though he was anxious, "Let's just hope she doesn't realize that we're already 3 steps ahead." The scene closes on the backdrop for a tense confrontation, where strategy and stealth would be more valuable than brute force. Clara had raised the stakes, but Adrian was no longer the weak target she thought she could manipulate. Clara sat in her own sitting room, a glint of frosty calculation in her eyes. She had witnessed Adrian slowly win back the Hawthorne family's trust, and with every step forward, her heart pounded louder. If she did nothing now, she would be entirely erased from their hearts. Clara, muttering to herself, "If words won't undo him, actions will. If subtlety fails, then I'll stage a disaster so convincing, they'll have no choice but to blame him." She had already studied the grand staircase in the Hawthorne mansion, imagining the perfect accident. A fall, seemingly catastrophic, entirely staged to make Adrian appear reckless or violent. Clara, smiling wickedly, jotting down notes: "A slip, a scream, everyone will see Adrian as the cause. And I'll emerge the innocent observer, the loyal family member trying to save the day." Later that evening, Adrian was helping organize papers in the library, finally feeling a sense of cautious belonging. The Hawthorne family's trust seemed almost complete. Adrian, thinking quietly, smiling to himself, "Maybe, finally things are settling. They're starting to look at me as who I am, not the deception Clara created." Without his awareness, Clara already had maneuvered the household into place. Servants were subtly warned, some lights softened, and the stairs polished just so as to be hazardous. Clara, whispering to herself behind the door, "Timing, perfect timing. One slip, one scream, and he'll fall from their favor completely." A sudden scream shattered the silence in the mansion. Clara, as if hurrying in, feigning panic, "Oh my goodness. Someone tripped on the stairs." The family rushed in promptly, and in the midst of the melee, Clara nodded surreptitiously towards Adrian. "Clara," trembling voice, looking as innocent as porcelain, he shouldn't have warned me about the steps. He told me to take those documents by myself. If only he'd been more careful." Gasps, wide eyes, whispers. It all happened faster than Adrian could react. Adrian, stammering forward, shocked and confused. "Wait, what? I wasn't near the stairs." "Clara, what are you saying to me?" Hawthorne matriarch, voice slicing, cutting through terror. "Adrian, is this true? Did you?" Adrian, voice strained, pleading, "No. You have to listen to me." She's, but the family, taken aback by the sudden appearance of the staged accident and Clara's incredible performance, stumbled. Doubt filled their eyes. Hawthorne patriarch, strict, conflicted. "Adrian, we've observed the measures you've taken before, and still this happens? We trusted you, how is this possible?" Adrian was aghast, his laboriously rebuilt trust in shreds within minutes. Clara stood by, eyes glinting triumphantly, though a little shadow of uncertainty crossed her face. Taking this risk was risky, and in case there was any evidence, the tables would be turned. Adrian, thoughtful, jaw clenched. "She's desperate, too desperate. But they believe she's telling the truth, at least, for now. I'll need more than words to set this right. I must act, but warily, cautiously, before it is too late." Meanwhile, whispers and uneasy glances were rampant in the household. Clara's ruse had worked, at least for the moment, but Adrian's brain was already turning, plotting how to unmask her deception without placing himself in greater danger. Clara, whispering to herself, a smile creeping. Look, Adrian, no matter how good you play, there are some rungs you can't take without falling. The Hawthorne estate was tense. Adrian, normally placid, now shouldered the weight of suspicion from the very people he should have been able to trust. Clara had regained temporary leverage, yet the stakes were higher than ever. A single misstep on the part of either party could trigger irrevocable consequences. Adrian, thoughts, internalized, to Elias that night. She's playing for blood now. I have to be smarter, faster. If she's going to stage an accident, nothing is out of bounds. But this is also proof of her desperation. And desperation always causes cracks. Adrian stood at the head of the curving staircase, staring down at the tableau Clara had fashioned. The Hawthorne family's whispers remained in his mind. Their eyes, those warm, trusting eyes, now suspicious, doubting, and filled with fear. Adrian, to himself, voice strangled all along. I've worked so hard to gain their trust. For their respect. And now it's gone. Like that. Do they care at all that I've tried? He felt a heavy weight in his chest, a mix of heartache, betrayal, and exhaustion. The family he wanted to be a part of and guard turned out to be distant and cold, naive to Clara's deceit. Adrian, muttering to himself, I thought that they'd love me a little. Maybe I meant something to them. But I was wrong. Without uttering a single word, Adrian grabbed his coat and quietly slipped out of the house. The night air hit him with a chill and recalled his lucidity for but an instant. He walked through the empty streets of the town, the dim lamps casting deep shadows, and at every one, he mirrored the isolation that pervaded within him. Adrian, brooding, introspective all these years, all the plots, the fightings, all for what? So that they can turn so easily against me? I just wished for a family who would care. A little. His footsteps echoed off the cobblestones, and each corner, each susurration of wind answering back with silence. He was completely alone, the warmth of connection receding further and further away from him. As he walked, into his mind came pictures of the Hawthorne home, laughter he had wished for, advice he had given, small wins that had filled him with hope. Now all those things were lies, or at least illusions, as if he had never actually belonged. Adrian, whispering, soft tone, I gave them everything. My loyalty, my patience, my trust. And they didn't see me. Not really. A wandering gust swept through the empty streets, stirring a few stray leaves at his feet. Adrian knelt down, letting them twirl around his boots. It was a brief, meaningless gesture, but somehow grounding, a brief reminder that the world continued to turn, even if it did not slow for him. He stood on the edge of the old town park, a place he had visited as a child whenever he felt invisible. He was sitting on a cold bench, his face buried in his hands. Adrian thought softly, I don't believe I can fix this. I can make them understand who I am. Maybe there are people who never do. Maybe love isn't something they can give. He stayed there for hours, watching the stars glimmer in the sky, hoping only that someone in that house paid attention, cared even a little bit about the pain he bore. The quiet of the night embraced him, a comforter to his despair. But even in desperation, a spark of determination began to flicker. He realized he could no longer rely on the Hawthorne family for endorsement. Theirs was a judgment tainted by Clara's manipulations, lost in her lies. If he wanted justice, respect, or even peace, he would have to take it himself. Adrian, thinking, jaw tightening, they don't see me, fine. I'll prove it to them. Not because they love me, but so that Clara doesn't get away with this. I'll discover my supporters. I'll discover the truth. And when they finally see her for what she is, perhaps then they'll realize who I truly am. The night dragged on, but Adrian waited, letting the cold air refresh him, letting his sorrow power the conception of a plan. Tomorrow would be a new beginning. Not for them, but for him. In the dimly lit study of the Hawthorne mansion, Clara's eyes gleamed with cold calculation. Damien, relishing the bitter flavor of his past humiliations, leaned forward in anticipation. Clara, smiling, low voice dripping with venom. You see, Damien, we can end this once and for all. Adrian's pride, his trust in this family, it's his Achilles heel. And we can use it. Damien, gritting his teeth, furious, after what he's done to me. I'll have my revenge. Anything you desire, Clara. Clara tapped her finger on a folder, her eyes murderously serious. Clara, a fabricated disappearance. We make it look as though he kidnapped little Henry. Just imagine, the entire household against him. No one will suspect us. Not even the board. Damien, nodding, almost greedily. He will not be able to talk his way out. He'll be caught, just like I was caught by them in the past. The plot went like a spider weaving its perfect web. Every step strategized, every loophole sealed. Clara's grip on Damien had turned him into a willing partner, driven by vengeance, unaware of her manipulations. Later that night, under the garden walls of the ancient estate, Clara and Damien set their plan in motion. Masks, ropes, and a carefully planted message. Henry was taken away under the pretense of protection, with clues left behind to frame Adrian. At sunrise, the Hawthorne household was in an uproar. Mrs. Hawthorne, sobbing, grasping a chair. Adrian, what have you done? Henry, he's gone. Adrian, shocked, his voice breaking. No. I swear I didn't touch him. Somebody set this up, Clara. Damien, it wasn't me. Yet his pleas fell on deaf ears. The household, fueled by fear and Clara's insinuations, recoiled. Mr. Hawthorne, furiously, accusingly, I cannot believe I'm even listening to you deny it. After all this, Adrian, how could you? You're finished here. Adrian objected to no avail. Clara's whispers had tainted every mind in the house, and Damien's presence as a witness sealed it. Damien, icily, leaning forward, see? You were never in control. This time, you can't talk your way out. No one believes you, Adrian. Not a soul. The family doors closed to him. Even Adrian's allies and friends he had gained inside the estate were cautious, fearful of Clara's cunning and Damien's power. Adrian, low voice, choking with anger and sorrow. Fine, believe what you want. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. He left the estate, betrayal and humiliation his armor as he swore to live on, but the rejection hurt. Inside the estate, Clara smiled in triumph. Damien observed, satisfied with the chaos. Clara, whispering, almost to herself at last, is outside the walls, Adrian Hawthorne. And now, we have everything he ever desired within our grasp. The family, the board, all ours for the taking. Damien, smiling, with lingering resentment, and no one will see us coming until it's too late. The house buzzed with rumor, rage, and terror, all skillfully manipulated. Adrian's absence was a convenient excuse for Clara's subtle tightening grip on the Hawthorne universe. Outside, in the cold night air, Adrian's fists clenched. His coat was torn by the wind, but he did not feel it. Adrian, thinking, in anger, they can believe her lies, they can have turned me away, but I will find the truth. I will return Henry. And when I do, they will know her for what she is. I'll make them. The darkness around was no longer comforting, a crucible. Each step away from the estate was a vow. Clara and Damien had won this war, but Adrian would survive. And he would strike back. Scene, the final severing. The doors of the mansion loomed before Adrian as he walked away, each step heavier than the last. He had been cast out, falsely blamed, and betrayed by the people he had thought of as family. Suddenly, a commotion erupted behind the doors. A small figure ran up the stairs. Henry, safe, sound. Adrian stopped and watched silently from the dark path. Adrian, to himself, bitterly so, they bring him back. Perfectly played, Clara. Perfectly played. He clenched his fists, feeling a mix of relief and resignation. The family would never understand the truth. The trust, the bonds, gone. He turned away from the estate, his coat catching the evening wind. Adrian, thinking, coldly, they don't deserve me. I'm done with them. All of it. He stepped into the night without a backward glance, leaving behind the house, the riches, and the family that had spurned him. Nothing remained but his own resolve and the silent promise that one day the scales would be rebalanced. Adrian sat alone in his small apartment, the city lights casting long shadows across his desk. Blueprints and documents stacked up around him, but he barely noticed them. He had crouched over figures, proofs, and theory for years, dreaming all the while for a glimmer of notice from the Hawthorne house. That was done, Adrian, to himself. Quietly, they never desired me, never esteemed me. All along, I worked for their approval for naught. He held in his hand a letter from the prestigious University of Eldoria, its seal glimmering like a vow. A professorship in research, one of the finest in the country. They had courted him for months, but he had spurned every opportunity, every chance, in the hope that familial affection would be reward enough for the loss. Adrian, smirking wryly, well, since they didn't appreciate me, I guess it's time I appreciate myself. He signed the letter of acceptance firmly, feeling a thrill he hadn't felt in years. Finally, recognition of his talent, untainted, unadulterated, and long overdue. Adrian, whispering to himself, I'll make a name for myself. Not for them, for me. Let them watch in the shadows while I rise. Outside, the city bustled on, oblivious to the quiet brilliance stepping into his own destiny, one that he would create with his own hands. The lecture hall of Eldoria University was packed to capacity, buzzing with anticipation. Adrian sauntered casually to the lectern, his air easy but intense. Scholars, students, and visiting dignitaries sat forward in their seats, curious to catch a glimpse of the young professor whose work was already making waves in theoretical physics. Adrian, addressing the hall today, I'm here to challenge a belief people take for granted. As he spoke, complex equations and revolutionary ideas flowed nimbly from his mind onto the chalkboard. His accuracy, simplicity, and outside-the-box thinking placed the crowd in awe. There was resounding applause at the end of it all, but impressed were not just the students. Scribbling away with urgency was an observant journalist covering the story who was writing up an article that would be read nationwide later. Away from prying eyes in his office, Adrian smiled at the commendations piling up. Awards, invitations to conferences, and grants for research were coming his way, but most satisfying was the sense of purpose he felt. He had finally applied all his genius to something that mattered, regardless of the family that rejected him. In the Hawthorne mansion, meanwhile, whispers began. Clara, Damien, and even certain members of the family heard whispers of news articles and scholarly journals speaking of Adrian's groundbreaking discoveries. Trevor, to Clara, nervously, have you seen this? It's Adrian. The university, they're saying he's one of the brightest minds in the nation. Clara's smile trembled, her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. Clara, coldly, struggling to compose herself, let them admire him to their heart's content. It will not matter here. He's out of our grasp. And even as she tried to conceal her unease, the seed of doubt had been planted. The Hawthorne family could not help but notice that the boy they had mocked was now getting attention and respect they had denied him. Adrian, blissfully unaware of their awakenings, was already writing his next lecture, his next article, and his next step to make himself known. He had lost a family, but he had gained a world. Adrian's fame went beyond the borders of Eldoria University. Lecture invitations for international conferences, research proposals for collaboration, and financial grants poured in. With every lecture he gave, every paper he penned, only reinforced the aura that was around him. Genius, revered, and unapproachable. Money, which had previously been inconsequential to him in his family's home, now poured in freely, not from them, however, but from institutions who recognized his genius. He bought a modest apartment in the city, furnished it with precision and elegance, and was surrounded by mentors, friends, and peers who valued him for himself, not his surname. In the Hawthorne house, whispers. Damien and Clara had shut themselves away in icy disdain, while the rest of the family tiptoed around Adrian's name. The shame of having banished him loomed over them like a ghost, too heavy to be ignored, too perilous to confront. Mrs. Hawthorne, to herself, quietly, how could we have been so blind? Mr. Hawthorne, in one of his rare private moments, without looking at the others, he's invincible now. We can't risk going near him. The family's guilt continued to fester, but pride prevented them from burying the hatchet. Even when Adrian's achievement ended up on the front page of national dailies, they complained among themselves instead of making contact, and in the meantime, Adrian, aware of the world that he had built without them, felt a secret vindication. He no longer needed their approval. Every award, every moment of accolade, was a reminder that he had been right to depart, to spend his time on himself rather than on love that never was. But even with all his success, there was still a pang of pain, a reminder of what could have been if only they valued hard work and commitment. Adrian no longer let that control him, though. he was now unattainable, not as much in wealth or celebrity, but in unshakable confidence of a man who had survived betrayal and emerged more powerful than anyone had ever imagined. Hawthorne House shone in the light of the chandeliers, with laughter, clinking glasses, and the murmur of high society. Damien's wedding was in full swing, a wedding calculated to demonstrate wealth, prestige, and the seemingly perfect harmony of the family. The guests smiled smugly, gossiping over the opulent details, unaware of the undertows of tension lurking beneath. Then, as Damien rose to toast with his glass in hand, a hush settled over the room. On the gift table rested a smooth, unsealed envelope, a gift without card, without giver. Somebody had placed it there before the rest arrived, out of sight. Curiosity bested him, and Damien opened it. Inside, a small digital gadget glowed sweetly. Thinking it a congratulatory video for the festivities, he pressed play. What filled the screen was anything but festive. Gradually, one at a time, pictures and video footage appeared on the screen. Adrian, his face full of hope and youth, humiliation and cold-hearted manipulation by Clara and Damien. The stolen money, the doctored evidence, the clever deceit, each minute meticulously filmed. Adrian's own voiceover told a tale of injustice, how he had pleaded to be believed, how he had been shunned, how he had been betrayed by those who were supposed to love him best. Gasps were exchanged among the guests. Laughter ceased. The once proud and untainted Hawthorne family stood by in horror as their greatest failures were all laid bare for all to see. Mrs. Hawthorne whispered, trembling, Is this true? Mr. Hawthorne paled. No, it can't be. Damien stuttered, addressing Clara. This wasn't supposed to happen. But it did. And the room was ruthless. Socialites began talking about the cruelty and haughtiness of the Hawthornes. Business partners were murmuring about withdrawing their support for deals. Invitations to future events were quietly dropped, and long-standing relationships began to disintegrate under the weight of public ostracism. Adrian's current, seemingly benevolent, had done what his arrival was powerless to do, exposed the family's schemes to the rest of the world. And left them with no choice but to accept reality. Clara's face went pale, her carefully constructed reputation crumbling in the live instant. Damien's wedding plans, the ceremony, the pomp and circumstance, all for naught now. Bowed their heads in shame, their heads together, the Hawthornes left the engagement hall. The engagement was quietly cancelled, and for weeks there were whispers behind them. They had lost their social standing, and their deceptions revealed, as well as their family unity irrevocably shattered. Outside, all mouths carried Adrian's name, but not for wealth and status, but for justice served. And for the first time, the world gazed at the Hawthorne family as anything other than the unapproachable elite, as a cautionary tale of pride, betrayal, and downfall. The collapse of the Hawthorne family was swift and merciless. In weeks of Damien's ruined engagement, business partners walked away, investors pulled out, and contracts lapsed overnight. Their name, now tainted, had once become synonymous with power, now a sign of ruthlessness and shame. In no time, the estate was repossessed, accounts were frozen, and imported vehicles were auctioned off. The Hawthornes felt hunger for the first time. Real, hollow hunger. Their fine clothes meant nothing when they could no longer buy bread. Party invitations were once coveted, now friends thrust them on the street. Neighbors tattled, some even laughed. Clara's looks no longer bought her power. Damien's conceit crumbled into desperation. Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne, once untouchable, stood in bread lines like beggars, pride shattered. That was when they understood the truth. Adrian was their only hope. When they finally gathered the courage to approach him, they were ready for outrage, perhaps even scorn. What they received, however, was Adrian looking at them with stoic, resolute eyes. Adrian, calmly, I no longer hate you. I forgave you, but forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. You made me live as if I were nothing. Now you'll understand what it is to live without the comforts you believed you deserved. Behind him was his new home, a sprawling villa in the heart of town, larger and more luxurious than the Hawthorne mansion had ever been. Proof of his prosperity. Adrian, firmly, my villa needs servants. Maidens. Guardsmen. Janitors. You want to live? You'll live. Or you'll starve. The ensuing silence was claustrophobic. The aristocratic Hawthorne family, now fallen on hard times, were faced with the unbearable choice, starvation or slavery. Their honor conflicted with their need, and need one out. Days later, the city echoed with shock and ghoulish interest. The Hawthorns, in immaculate workers' overalls, were mopping floors, silver polishing, and working gates of the very man they had flung out. Ex-cooks, ex-maids, ex-drivers, those they had derided, now bossed them around. Every command, every scolding, reminded them of how far they had sunk. Rumors circulated on the streets. Did you hear? The mighty Hawthorns now take orders from Adrian. They used to treat their workers like trash. Now they're the workers. Poetic justice, isn't it? Adrian never boasted. He never sneered. He simply let them live the life they had forced on others. And even if humiliation burned in their hearts, they obeyed, for the alternative was worse. Later, Adrian did not just turn out to be a prodigy, but a man who had turned betrayal into his strength. The Hawthorns were no longer his tormentors, they were living proofs that pride tumbles down and cruelty always returns full circle. And the city, watching from the sidelines, would never forget the day the Hawthorns turned into servants in the home of the son they disowned. On the balcony of his villa, Adrian sipped a glass of wine while watching the sun set beneath the horizon. The city lights flickered to life, reflecting the restless rhythm of a world that never slept. Below, in the courtyard, the Hawthorns labored under their new roles. Damien hauled crates from the delivery van, perspiration rolling down his face. Clara polished the marble floors with trembling hands, her proud eyes cast downward. His parents toiled the gardens, stooping where they once had stood tall. Adrian breathed a sigh, not of victory, not of resentment, but of silent resignation. Adrian, to himself, I've already forgiven them, but forgiveness doesn't erase the lesson they need to learn. He set the glass down and leaned against the railing, his eyes calm but resolute. Adrian, softly, as though addressing the wind, no one is superior to anyone in this world. Pride blinds, power corrupts, and fortune shifts like the tide. Tables turn any moment, and when they do, it is not strength that binds you, but humility. He had wasted years pleading for love, for acceptance, for even a scrap of their belief. Now he had none of their love, but something far superior, freedom they struggled beneath, burdened by shame, while Adrian, their former family outcast, had become their lifeline for survival. Yet he took no pleasure in their suffering. Instead, he felt balance restored. He walked away from the courtyard, retreating into the spacious, silent halls of his villa. His life was no longer tied to their approval, their judgment, or their betrayal. He had transcended them, and as the evening drew to a close, Adrian knew this truth: his past had hurt him, but it also had shaped him into the man he was today. The world looked up to him, history would remember him, and his family, once so mighty, would never be able to forget the price of cruelty. The tables had turned, and Adrian walked away, at last a free man. The end.